I think something is wrong with me. This started about a week ago, I think, and to be honest, I didn't notice anything at first. Not really. Just a few small bruises on my legs and an inability to fall asleep. Most people have bruises they can't explain, so I thought nothing of it aside from noticing the oddity that there were 3 which formed a nearly perfect triangle. I honestly thought I'd run into a table or a counter and just didn't remember it. Hell, if I'm being honest, that very well might have been the case here, although I'm inclined to think, for reasons beyond my own understanding, that this is somehow connected. I've never been someone who slept really well, but this past week has been total hell. I wake up feeling almost more tired than I'd been when I went to bed, and I'm drowsy throughout the day until maybe 7 p.m. or so, when I suddenly get a burst of energy so strong that I feel like if I don't do something, my heart will explode. I went to a doctor about that, and he suggested I participate in a sleep study, and he put me on a prescription for anti-anxiety medication to help with my sudden explosive bursts of energy before bed. The sleep study is still a few days away, but for some reason, I'm starting to become afraid that they won't be able to find anything. I stopped by the store on my way home from the doctor, and a man approached me in the checkout line. He was a large, burly man, and he called me by name. And although I can't remember seeing him before, he gave me a tight bear hug that seemed distinctly familiar. "I'm sorry," I told him. "I don't think I'm the person you think I am." "No way, man," he said. "You don't remember me? Tom Jarvis. Everyone called me Roach in high school, remember?" I didn't remember. Still don't. I knew with absolute certainty that I had not ever known a man named Roach in my life. The expression on my face gave me away before I could lie and pretend that I recognized him. "We ate lunch like every day together senior year," he said. "You dated my sister." I shrugged. "Sorry, I don't think I even remember dating anyone my senior year. I think you've got the wrong person." I began handing the cashier my groceries as my head began to subtly pound, with my heartbeat, which I then noticed was alarmingly fast. Why was I so nervous? "Yeah," he said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck with his meat cleaver of a hand. "I guess you're right." I bid him farewell and checked out with my milk and eggs, but the moment stuck with me the whole way home. He was certain he knew me. He had called me by name after all, but I was equally as certain that I'd never known him. At least, I thought I was. After I got home, Roach was still skittering around in my mind like the insect he'd been nicknamed after. I couldn't shake it. I searched Facebook and found him, but we had no mutual friends. I ate dinner and went to the gym, but still, I couldn't shake this strange, almost distantly nostalgic feeling. I knew that whatever sleep problems I'd had up until that point were only going to get worse if I couldn't get this guy out of my mind. I called my mum and asked if I could come over to her house. I had a few boxes there in her basement from my glory days of high school, and I wanted to check the yearbook. Just one last stone to turn before I could say, in good faith, that I tried to remember him. She asked if everything was all right, and I told her things were just fine. I had no idea then that I was lying to her. And I went over. She lives 10 minutes away, preferring to keep close to her only son since the passing of my father. And so, 15 minutes after our conversation on the phone, I was sitting in a chair in the basement, flipping through the Hunter High School yearbook. I found myself, the gawky teenage version of me, with bad hair and acne that had just started to abate. And a few page turns later, I found the man who called himself Roach. It was unmistakable that the man I'd run into in the store was the same person. His striking features and larger-than-life personality came through the yearbook photo without any difficulty. He wore glasses in this picture, and his hair was much longer and thicker than it was on the man I'd just met, but that was undoubtedly him. My palms were wet with sweat, and my head ached dully as I turned to the index at the back of the book, where it listed all the pages with pictures of each student. I found my name, and next to it were 4 page numbers. I flipped to the first, a student body officer page, and I found myself posing as a senior class secretary with the rest of the class officers. That I remembered. I flipped to the next, a candid shot of the school lunchroom. It took a moment to find myself, but when I did, I stared hard at the boy next to me. It was Roach. I could tell as clearly as I could see myself sitting there, just as he'd said. We were eating lunch together. I flipped to the other two, and in both I was posed next to Roach, one of us in a class play of Julius Caesar, and the other one with his arm over my shoulder at a school dance with two girls, our dates presumably, stood off to the side with cups of punch. 3 of the 4 pictures had me posing with a man I had no memory of. I stared at these for some time, trying hard to remember taking the pictures, let alone any memory of the kid who looked like my best friend, then boxed up the yearbook. I thought about taking it with me, but something told me I'd be better off leaving it there. I asked my mum then, as I walked out of the door, as casually as I could, if she remembered me talking about anyone named Roach when I was in high school. "Oh, yes," she said at once, looking up from her nightly Family Feud episode. "He was such a nice boy. What happened to him?" "We had a falling out," I guessed, shrugging. "I ran into him at the store today, though." "Oh, that's just perfect," my mother said, clasping her hands together. "Did he say anything about his sister still being single?" "No," I said, realising that I'd forgotten to look her up as well, wondering briefly if perhaps she had been one of the girls in the last picture, but not wanting to go back downstairs to do so. "I think she's probably married." "Oh, pooh," my mother said, an expression she'd used since I was little and copied her "oh shit" remark at the store once. "Well, you should find out anyway. She was a real cutie." "Yeah," I said dismissively, giving her a hug and a peck on the cheek. "I'll do that." I drove home in my car, thinking about symptoms of selective amnesia. I think I saw an episode about it on House, or maybe some other doctor show, and I always thought it was something more common and likely on television than something actually experienced in real life. I entered my house, and with my brain completely enveloped in this thought, I didn't realise that, on autopilot, I'd managed to dig the men's once-a-day vitamins out of the back of the cupboard until I was shoving 3 of the yellow pills into my mouth. I spat them out into my hand, then thought for a moment, and popped one of them back in and swallowed it with a glass of water. It's been a while since I've regularly taken any sort of daily vitamin, but it really wouldn't hurt, and might even help with my sleep. My head began to pound, and so I threw the soggy pills into the garbage can, wondering why in God's name I'd beelined for the vitamins in the first place. I found a bottle of Tylenol, and took some of that as well. I was exhausted mentally, but physically I still felt like I could win a cage match against a silverback gorilla. I took one of the Xanax I had and went to bed, hoping maybe that and the television could lull me to sleep. I sat in bed for a few hours, watching mindless television, but the longer I sat there, the more my heart began to race. I felt unnerved and uneasy, like I was being watched by somebody I couldn't see. Now, like I said before, I've never been paranoid in my entire life, but I got the idea in my head that I actually was being watched. The more I thought about it, the more likely it seemed. I knew it sounded crazy, but the thought was like an itch I just had to scratch. I got up out of bed. My pit bull, Dave, watched me lazily from his bed in the corner as I checked that the window was still closed and locked, then moved around the rest of the house to do the same. Every door was still locked, every window was still closed, and the closets were empty. Aside from Dave and the fern I kept next to the couch in the living room, I was the only thing in the house. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I checked the outlets in my room for cameras. I'd never thought to do this before, and now it just seemed silly that the thought had never crossed my mind. I checked the light bulbs and took the battery out of my laptop and cell phone. Still, I knew I was being watched. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It had transcended mere worry and had become inarguable fact, however unprovable. I knew I wasn't alone. I'm not sure what time I fell asleep, and I honestly don't remember even going to bed, but I know it must have been early because I remember seeing the light from the sun begin to peek between the curtains. When I awoke, I was as exhausted as ever and was ashamed at what I'd done. In the light of day, I saw the previous night for what it was, pathetic paranoia of a man whom couldn't sleep. I put the battery back in my phone and put the light bulbs back in their sockets, feeling silly as I did so, even though the only witness to my temporary lapse of sanity was Dave, and he hardly cared what I did at all. As I busied myself around my house, going room to room, putting everything back together, I found something that gave me pause. It wasn't much, not really, just an unlatched window. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except I could have sworn on my mother's life that I'd checked them all during my paranoid delusion the night before, especially because that one was my bedroom window, the one I'd checked both first and last. My stomach twisted as I tried to rationalize the window being unlocked. Perhaps the wind had been exceptionally violent while I was asleep, or maybe Dave had gotten up and been scratching at the window. I'd seen him do it at least once before. As I came to this conclusion, however thin, I turned around and found something even more alarming. It was a spot of blood on my pillowcase, about the size of a nickel. I ran to the bathroom to check my face, my nose, my ears, to see what part of me had bled onto the pillow, except I saw nothing but my own tired face, devoid of injury, staring back at me. I saw myself then, really saw myself, and I felt even more insane. My tired, wild eyes reflecting back at me, my unshaven face, my mouth turned down in the corners to form an expression of deep worry. I was losing it. I am losing it. It was then that I decided to seek help, to see if I could find someone, anyone, who knew what might be going on with me.